Hi, friends. It is I, host Eric of Talking with Famous People. Today, I find myself asking yet another extremely important and provocative question. Is being sensitive good? And the answer is yes. Despite the fact that I might periodically say something like, God, people are so sensitive. Overall, being sensitive is a good thing. Being sensitive means you're aware of mostly how words impact people dramatically, you know? When somebody punches you in the face, nobody goes, oh my God, you're so sensitive. What's the problem? What's the big deal? You know? They only do that about words. So my point is being sensitive is not inherently a bad thing at all. In fact, I consider myself pretty sensitive about certain things, you know? So it also has occurred to me that I burned my finger this morning, like an idiot. I was holding a cigarette, I was leaning, reaching, and I ended up burning my finger with a cigarette. So it's a terrible place to burn your finger because right where I hold my cigarette, so it's a nightmare. It's an absolute fucking nightmare. This little burn right there on the side of my finger. It's right. If you can see it or not. Yeah, see it? You can see it. There it is. No, I don't like those things. Those things are horrible. They make me cough so much. Cigarettes make me cough way less than I have tried it. I've tried e-cigarettes. I use them when I travel sometimes, you know, if I'm on a plane, if I have plane rides and stuff. Nicotine vaping it feels to me much worse for me health-wise than this. And one of the reasons I think that might actually be true is that vaping introduces into your lungs much smaller particulates than does cigarettes. So the claim, of course, is that vaping introduces less bad particulates, but even if that's the case, I like the idea of larger particulates that manage to get in less deeply, you know? You tried smoking weed on a plane, now you're on a no-fly list. Well, that was kind of down, Bob Perez. I'm not going to lie. That's what God invented edibles for? Here, I got a special treat for you, though. Like that? You smoked out on a plane. I'm smoking with these two fingers now. You know? I have vaped on a plane plenty of times. Like, when I go on a plane, I take my electronic cigarette and I have a hoodie on, and I just pull up the hoodie, hit it underneath the cigarette, hit it underneath my hoodie, and put it back in my pocket. Nobody's the wiser. It doesn't really blow out anything, you know? It's like the no smell kind, I guess. You just blow out a little bit of steam. No flavor to it. What type's most likely to smoke weed on a plane? Somebody young and or ultra entitled. It's like when one of the bald ones refused to stop playing Words with Friends when his plane was taking off. He was right, TI wise. It's a stupid fucking rule. But he was obviously feeling way too entitled, you know? Because we all know it's a stupid rule, but we also recognize the fact that everybody on this plane is trying to get somewhere. And that if we don't adhere to this stupid rule, it is going to delay not just us, but everybody else. And it's not going to solve the problem. It's not like righteous, and not like the righteousness of yourself is going to be conveyed to others through this mechanism, you know. When it is the case that breaking a rule successfully can express righteousness and convey that information to others, it's a good idea to break it. But I don't think that's a context in which it's going to work, you know. I mean, I used to say that people have a duty to break unjust laws, but that's obviously silly. It doesn't. That's a rule that doesn't universalize at all. So it would just be me being, you know, I guess, edgy about something or whatever. I mean, ENTPs and INTPs are hard to tell apart by testing them because any kind of conversation kind of test is going to have difficulty distinguishing between INTP and ENTP. If I didn't know anything about type, and I got typed by somebody who types like me, they very well might type me as an INTP. Because I'm going through an assessment, I'm much more turned to listening and getting information. So I'm much more revelatory by TI. It also depends somewhat on my mood, you know. It's like if you're looking for extroversion or introversion at all, and it's hard not to include that in your typing, even though it's not a function. It's still hard not to be influenced by a person's apparent extroversion or introversion. So INTP ENTP is actually one of the least comfortable distinctions I can make typologically, along with the XFJs, because they have FE1 or 2, and that means that you know, a tool function, extroverted tool function, will often display as extroverted when pushed on by the world, like a typing session, and an introverted tool function will often display as you know, introverted when pushed on by the world, because that's your default way of dealing with shit. Well, I'm trying to violate my default way of dealing with shit a little bit here today by pointing out that being sensitive is actually a good thing. And while I get frustrated when people are too sensitive, I'm not really getting frustrated by their actual sensitivity. If I say something like, if I call somebody a tard or something, and Bob Perez has a little sister who's retarded, then he's actually going to probably feel some sensitivity, you know? Like, I don't like that use of a classification of mental disability to insult people. So somebody's going to be, that's like genuine sensitivity, right? The thing that I get mad about is politicized sensitivity, where people are being sensitive on other people's behalf for political reasons. Like, somebody's policing racism, misogyny, or whatever else kind of language without actually owning any sensitivity about it, right? They're sensitive about it politically, not about it legitimately. So like Bob Haruz says, damn, I'm mad horny right now. For somebody like me who's had their horniness surgically removed, that makes me feel very sensitive. It makes me want to cry because I'm so jealous of your capacity to be horny. No, I didn't really get my horniness surgically removed. I got it physically removed by Rachel yesterday. Yeah, if you have access to INTPs over time, I agree. They tend to be serious and stoic. But if you are doing a 1-hour typing session with an INTP, they often come into the typing session full of blah 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 blah. You know, INTPs will often come in just chock full of words, and then over the course of the typing session, I'm hopeful that I can pin them down as ENTP or INTP. And at the end of the typing session, if they're an INTP or an ENTP, I'm never going to be more than about 95% because, for the reasons I articulated. You're best off testing the polar. You know, if you can do some work trying to identify FI polar. INTPs, when you push on them to reveal their FI polarness, they reveal a more nuanced understanding of it. But you want to talk about nuance? I titled this video, Being Sensitive is Good. Or no, I asked a question, is being sensitive good? Right. So if I hurt someone's feelings and they don't attack me about it, I feel terrible. If I hurt someone's feelings and they attack me about it, I hold them in contempt. You know? 6 slot versus polar, how does that work? It's a good question because it was something I was thinking about last night as I was going to bed. Wanting to talk about the fact that here's an example of 6 and 7. Each 7th slot kind of defines what I believe to be your core fear in life. My core fear is polar FI is that I'm worthless. Rachel's core fear is polar TE is that she's useless. Different things. But as a consequence, I am constantly feeling the need to prove that I'm useful in order to be worth something. She's constantly feeling the need to prove that she's loving in order to establish for herself that she's useful. In other words, she's useful to me by being loving. So I think that probably holds true across the board, that people's core fear. Now, look, if you have trauma, this doesn't count, okay? If you have childhood trauma, your core fear is abandonment. It's always the case. If you have childhood trauma, your core fear is abandonment and trusting. You're desperately afraid of trusting anybody. If you have childhood trauma. If you don't have childhood trauma, then you still have your cognitive function inherent fear. And that's what I'm talking about here. If you have a cognitive function inherent fear, then it's going to be based on your 7th slot. So FI tells you, if you have good FI, you know that you and your interests and what you want are important. You don't have to wonder why somebody else likes you if you're FI Dom. It never crosses your mind to wonder. Well, you're you, and you're unique and valuable in and of yourself, and you have lots to offer. If you're FI 7th, you have no sense of being valuable except as you're useful to other people. And you don't like being useful to other people. Because it's sixth thought. It's like the cognitive function of, you know, careless ass fuck. It's like it's like cognitive functions just shove it in there by surprise all of a sudden. You're like, hey, wrong hole. So like, let's say you're an ISTP. Well, then your core fear is that you have nothing new to offer. That you're boring and unoriginal, I guess. And then your way of trying to prove that you are not boring and unoriginal and whatever is to use your SI to recall stuff that you've done that's not boring and unoriginal. Is there a local airport nearby? We have the closest airport to where I live is actually the Almonte Airport, which is just for small planes, for like Cessnas and stuff. Then we have the Burbank International Airport, but that's quite some distance from my house. And we have the Almonte Airport is not a grass strip. It's concrete, but it's a small airport. I mean, it's tucked in between the metro station, which is right next to the freeway, and and then just like Jack in the Box and Sam's Club and regular shit's all around it. You know, I would suppose, I don't know anything about flying planes, but I would suppose that you kind of have to come in here and then like quickly go down because it's not a big airport at all. But I don't know anything about flying planes. You live by Almonte? I live in Arcadia, so pretty close to Almonte. Almonte, when I was a teenager, is one of the places I used to go to buy street marijuana from Mexicans. And it's funny, I never got ripped off in California buying street drugs. Like, I have gotten ripped off in the deep south trying to buy street drugs. That's what I have to say about that, by the way. It's not bad necessarily. You know, it was hit and miss in quality. Mexican street weed is, back in the day, it came very compressed. You know, they ship it in bricks that they smushed as compressed as possible, and they'd have like secret compartments in their trucks to get it over the border or something, you know. So frequently enough, the weed would smell like diesel fuel, so you let it air out a little bit. But so as I understand from what you said, people are blind to their fears. I think it's not so much that you're blind to your fears, but for me anyway, it required metacognition to understand what my fear was. Hero Lamb says, I think if you aren't somewhat sensitive, you can't really appreciate things on a deeper level. I mean, if you imagine lacking sensitivity, it may mean that everything in life is meaningless for you. Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of the weird conundrums or contradictions, apparent contradictions of being an ENTP. I'm actually extremely sensitive. Like in anime that I watch, whenever there's a scene of child abuse, domestic violence, animal abuse, I have to skip it. I've given up watching, I love to watch them. I've given up watching animal videos because unavoidably, no matter how careful you are, you're going to end up getting an animal video that goes into something super sad, like, but these creatures are now endangered. And they show like hunters shooting them and stuff. It's just like, okay, I cannot watch this. I remember seeing this one thing one time about the Chinese porpoises. I was just watching something I thought was casual to watch, like River Monsters, this show where this British guy goes, or I don't know if he's British. He's probably British, but he might be like South African or something. He goes to various rivers all around the world and tries to catch these big ass fish. And it's a fun show. I like to watch it, except there's way too little time fishing and way too much time building up bullshit about how these big fish are so dangerous or something. But anyway, during that, they showed this brief interview with this Chinese guy who talked about these Chinese freshwater porpoises and his rescuing them from a net and stuff. And it's still to this day, whenever I think about it, I am just like, oh God, I wish I hadn't seen that. It was heart-wrenching. So I've always been somebody who has FI painful stuff sticks in my memory, so I desperately try to avoid it. Are INFPs the most sensitive? Yeah. Sensitivity is expressed in a couple of different ways, right? So I would say that INFPs are the least likely to carelessly hurt somebody else with words. In that regard, they're the most sensitive. But they're also a type that's fairly likely to cheat. And the reason for that is it's like an FI Dom knows how important it is for themselves to be happy and for their feelings to be attended to properly. If they find themselves in a bad relationship, they may have a lot of trouble getting out of it, and they may have a lot of trouble communicating what the problem is. So it's certainly among possibilities that INFP will cheat, because INFP is probably going to get into a relationship on the younger side, and they're going to want to settle down with the exact right person, but life doesn't operate on that timetable. It's like an ideal INFP relationship would move forward very slowly, and the INFP would have plenty of time to get to know whether they really, really like this person. That's the thing about FI. I'll answer your question in a second, Lauren McKinley. In the olden days, back when to court a woman meant to, first you visited the family and you sat in the parlor with the woman and her parents and you had a conversation, and you had a chaperoned carriage ride, and then you went to the public dance, and within about a year, then you'd be working up to where you really want to have sex with her. So at that point, you'd have to decide, okay, do I really want to marry this chick or not? And you got to make sure you get along with her without having sex for a long time. I think that's a much more well suited to INFPs, that system, than the current system, where it's like neither women nor men in general are patient. Women are a little more patient in general than men, but if I started dating somebody and we were dating 3 months in and I still hadn't tried to get on her, she'd conclude I was gay or something, right? Well, here's the thing, Hero Lamb. I actually think the worst trait of INFPs is that they think all criticism or negative towards people other than themselves is bad. So it's like, you can't shit on anybody around an INFP without them defending that person. If I were to talk about how awful Kim Jong-un is, the INFP would be like, dictators are people too. You know? Oh yeah, they're big substance abusers as well. Don't get that wrong. INFPs are just as into drugs and alcohol as ENTPs are. What is the benefit of eating a chocolate bar? You have one less chocolate bar to carry around. One fewer. I'm so sorry. I deeply, deeply apologize for misusing less when I should have used fewer. Shame on me. I don't want to play any party to that reduction of fewer into less. INFPs are the ultimate hippies. I mean, I think of the ultimate hippies as being a little bit more extroverted than that. So I would say probably ENFPs are the ultimate hippies. It sounded like you were saying your core fear is rooted in the 7th, but we try to overcome it with the 6th while countervaluing the 6th. Who designed this faulty system? I agree it's a faulty system. And the thing is, if we're in a truly easy mode life, then our parents have guaranteed us with lots of reasons and emotions and love and stuff that whatever our fear of the 7th slot is, we don't need to worry about it. So if your fear that you're lazy, core fear is laziness if you're SE polar, and you try to resolve that with providing singularity, relevance. Well, I may not be doing a lot of shit, but everything I do is relevant. I hate being forced to be relevant because I'd rather be ideational, but that's what I'll provide for you. That way I don't have to do much because everything I do is so relevant. So as a consequence, you end up with somebody who really needs NI provided for them in order to give them something to SE, but who instead doesn't like having NI provided for them, thinks they're going to provide the NI, and resents having to do that. SE polar is afraid of reality. I mean, I think it's afraid of the need to act, basically. It's like, but when you're talking about self-identifying that or sort of internalizing that, I have a question. My niece's kindergarten class has me teaching her that math equations are called number sentences. I don't think that's dumbing down the vocabulary for children. I think that's actually framing up, because in fact, math equations are number sentences. They're better called number sentences. At least then people would understand that math is just a weaker language than language. It's not like people think math is somehow fancier than English or whatever. Math is just a weaker, more simplified language that does less stuff. By limiting the scope of what the language does, you can make it a lot more powerful, because it's not having to do too many things. Math's only trying to speak sentences about the relationship between objects in space and time. Well, it's a thinner language, let's say, a less comprehensive language. We need this separate language because when we want to talk very precisely about objects, space, and time, and the relationship of the three things, then we need to. Our word language is inadequate. We need to adopt a separate set of symbols that allow us to meaningfully say sentences about objects in space and time. No, I'm saying math is limited because of the following sense. I can say 2 + 2 = 4 in words, or I can put it in numerals, right? So spoken language can subsume at least some of math language, whereas math language does not subsume any of spoken language. So in that sense, it's a bigger set, right? It's not, I shouldn't have said weak. Weak is a bad word for that, right? It's not a weaker language. It's a thinner language and therefore a more powerful language. So there's much less disagreement when people speak to each other in math than there is when people speak to each other in language. That's one of the powers of math, is that it's because it's limited, the validity metric is, there's very little dispute over the validity metric. Well, that's the thing. It's not more precise either. It's more precise when it calibrates at a more sensitive level when you're dealing with objects, space, and time exclusively, and not people, right? It excludes agency from the equation. That's the main thing that math does to make itself more powerful in its frame and also more limited, is it excludes agency from the equation. No, it's also correct to say that a language like Japanese is a much weaker language than English. English conveys English incorporates, or includes, I guess is a better word, many more distinctions between varying degrees of things. So whereas English might have 20 words for varying degrees and kinds of sadness, Japanese might have 2 words, and they convey the other connotations with tone and stuff. No, I mean, English is the strongest spoken language because it has the largest vocabulary by a substantial amount. And so the thing about language and vocabulary is essentially things that we can't name, don't have names for, don't exist for us outside of an experiential realm. So even if it's the case, MJ, that SE DOMs maximally attain realism, that doesn't mean SE polar is afraid of reality, because realism, to call it favoring reality is to deny it of any definition. I mean, but it's dominant because of vocabulary. I mean, I when I say it's a strong language, I don't mean a strong player in a game of popularity or something. I mean, it allows people to convey more ideas and more information. In other words, people who are fluent in English have a broader reality than those who aren't. Because the breadth of one's communicative reality is determined by the size of one's vocabulary. Well, see, English just takes that word. So whenever English doesn't have a word for something and another language has it, we just take that word. So we've taken a number of German words, including Zeitgeist and Schadenfreude. We didn't have words for those. So now they're part of our language and everybody uses them, you know? Japanese made itself more powerful by incorporating a fair amount of English. That's just an Eric thing, okay? I grew up with my parents saying that. That's why I say Das ist verboten. Because when my parents wanted to tell me something was not allowed, they'd say a German accent and go, Das ist verboten! Which I guess they must have heard a lot in Germany. I don't know. That's what I imagine Germany as being like. A bunch of Germans walking around, going up to each other, going, Das ist verboten! What is forbidden? I don't know. Everything! Everything is forbidden! Yes, you know what? I am so tired of all this legislative process. It is such a hassle. Can we just make one law that says everything's forbidden? No, they lived in Germany for quite a while. Valerie Alwood. And France as well. They spent a lot of time in Europe. What's an angrier language, German or Russian? Good question. German's angrier, Russian's more evil. That's the answer. If you listen to Russians, we're planning our evil scheme right now. It's kind of like that, right? Whereas Germans are like, Nein, nein, nein! Das ist verboten! And you're always confused. Like, what are they so angry about? Oh, because I didn't order my bratwurst before sitting down. I see. That's the problem. There was this great German guy in the AA group that I was in Shanghai. And he was not like that at all. He was super friendly. But still had this German pride in being efficient and effective that he'd talk about periodically. But we got everything done, of course, for German. And but he was super nice. I liked him a lot. It's like the Germans do believe themselves to have this, we do things the best way. We're the most efficient. We're German. The Japanese are also, they have this big concept of themselves, Watching all this anime I've seen multiple instances of Japanese fantasy regarding Westerners. So I've seen multiple instances of the small Japanese guy saying, you sure seem pretty full of yourself, Westerner, with this tall, Germanic, blonde, blue-eyed enemy guy, and then the enemies are like, oh, I guess we underestimated the Japanese. And then the Japanese kick their ass, And then if you want to see a series that is all about sort of Japan's concept of itself gate. In gate, the Japan Self-Defense Force travels through a gate to another world, which they declare the special region of Japan, which justifies them sending military forces there. I think it's really great that this cartoon includes this because, Japan's pact post-World War II allows them to have self-defense forces and for the self-defense forces to not leave Japan. And so the anime made a point of being like politically accurate by the Japanese having to get around this by declaring this new area a special region of Japan. They're the only country that has a gate access to it. So now all of a sudden it's totally legal for them to send forces there under international law and under treaty, Isn't that? No, just called GATE, GATE. It's just called GATE. So anyway, in this series, basically what happens is this gate opens up and this medieval army pours out and attacks Tokyo. They are very quickly dispatched, of course, because they've got swords and bows and arrows and shit, right? And Japan's got modern weaponry. So Japan then sends in the army through the gate and sets up base in the other world. The combined armies of the empire of the other world attack Japan's self-defense forces after they set up their beachhead there in the other world. And then what happens? There's this scene where all these people with swords and bows and arrows and shit are charging up this hill, and they're just getting mowed down by machine gun fire and mortar fire, and they kill 100,000 people in like the first big battle. And they go, okay, well, now let's see if we can win over the hearts and minds of the people. And then they go about being like this. The whole time they're displayed as this super virtuous modern army that comes in, sets up camp, engages in legitimate treaties and deals with all the existing nations there rather than conquering, even though they just beat all their armies, and does humanitarian work, but is careful about taking on too much. And increasingly as the show goes along, everybody loves and admires them, and the other world's all about like there's frequent moments of this thing about Japanese culture is so amazing. In like the fighting animes where it's like the MMA ones, there's in Baki, which is the most ridiculous cartoon you will ever fucking see. There's a scene where Muhammad Ali has to admit that to this Japanese guy who's basically ambushed him while he's jogging and beat up all of his people he was jogging with until it was just him left. And then he's like, Muhammad Ali has a spar with him, and Muhammad Ali goes, "Oh, I have to admit, my martial arts will never be as good as yours, and I'm ashamed." And then the Japanese guy says, "Don't be ashamed of yourself. You should be proud of yourself, because the only reason your martial arts didn't get up to being almost as good as mine is because you did the righteous thing of draft dodging and avoiding the Vietnam War." And of course, this coming from the guy whose whole life, Baki's father, whose whole life is dedicated towards violence, But of course, Baki was written by an ESFP and it's just the wackiest fucking no sense at all show I've ever seen. I can't believe how much of it I watched, considering how terrible it was. It was terrible, and yet I watched so much of it. I watched quite a bit. At first, I thought, "Oh, this is pretty good." Like the first episode or two, whoever wrote it must have really like refined the first couple of episodes or something as best they could, and then it just turned into just 12-year-old boy story, And then there was a Yeti, and then they punched each other in the face. And then there was an explosion. And none of it didn't make any sense at all. Hey, it's that golfer lady. How's your golf game? No, wait. Michelle Way. Is that a figure skater or a golfer? I think there's either a famous figure skater or ladies golfer named Michelle Way. I do believe. Or you could be a totally different person, maybe even. Golfer. Are you the golfer or are you not actually Michelle Way? Legends Fall, what do you find especially rewarding? Is there something you like to chase after, like money, women, poker, blackjack, fishing trips to the Keys? What Legends Fall finds really rewarding is researching how the election was stolen. Finding simple pleasures was what his philosophy was all about. Very hedonist. That's all of the West right now. Who? Epicure? Epicurean. Who is Epicure anyway? Legends Fall. I believe they prefer to be called chicks. Korean. Her last name is W-I-E. Your husband is Chinese, so your last name is W-E-I, pronounced Wei. How's her last name pronounced? Wee. Like that? You know, my clients, they are the Lius. I don't think they pronounce it like that, L-I-U. I pronounce it Liu because that's what it looks like, but I think they might just pronounce it Lou. You know, they might just leave out the I, even though it's right there for anybody to see. Shui Chang Lu, Hong Chao Lu. As I used to tell the cab drivers in Shanghai when I wanted them to take me home. Shui Chang Lu, Hong Chao Lu. I want to go to the corner of Shui Chang Lu and Hong Chao Lu. They're the two streets in Shanghai. That's where I lived. Oh, close. I had to walk half a block from that corner, but it was the easiest thing to tell this taxi driver, rather than to try to tell him like this apartment complex that's very close to the corner of Hong Chao Lu, Shui Chang Lu. You went in for a job interview. The guy said, "I thought I was meeting the famous Korean golfer." I had to correct him. It's funny because, of course, your name's not even spelled the same. So, yeah, well, I mean, you should say, "Yeah, that's me." What? Hi, it's me, Michelle Way, the famous Korean golfer. You don't look Korean. Who are you to tell me what race I am? Racist? You want to hear me speak Korean? What? It means it's time to smoke a cigarette in Korean. Okay? That's why I'm smoking. You can't smoke in here, ma'am. Yeah, I can. I just said in Korean. I'm a famous golfer. I can do whatever the fuck I want. You've got the job. Is that how your job interview went? That's the only thing I can say in Korean is it's time to smoke a cigarette. Or it's smoking time, you might say. I can also say kimchi and Seoul and Gangnam Style. Did I serve in the Korean War? No. My dad did. He didn't see any action, though. I mean, he was in the military towards the end of the Korean War, and it was in the Navy. He was on a boat near Korea, but he didn't actually fight any Koreans. Tanji. Who's Tanji? You know how old you have to be to have served in the Korean War, Michelle? You got to be at least 80 years old. Do you think I'm 80 years old? I'm not even 50 years old. I'm 29. I'm 29 years old, Michelle. Yeah, I balded a little early. Yeah, I'm highly wrinkled for a 29-year-old. Sure, I've gone gray quickly. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm 29. I wonder what's a species that lives 90% as long as humans do. Because then you could say you're whatever in dog years, but in that years, and you just be a little bit younger, it would be believable, Like, oh, I'm 45 in chimpanzee years. How long do chimpanzees live, I wonder? Tortoises live quite a long time. So I'd be like 75 in tortoise years. Oh yeah, I'm taking appointments. You can always just email me. Is Isaiah Rude supposed to update that? He's an ENTP, so it gets updated sometimes. Maybe. When you get an ENTP to do a job of maintaining something, forget about it, as they say in New York Italian. Forget about it. Maintenance is not our strong suit. Yeah, tortoises can live a long ass time. They get quite large too, They are large and in charge. I think it's a generally good idea. What we should do in terms of where's your blueberry sweetheart? Are you talking about Rachel? She dyed her hair black, by the way. She doesn't have blue hair anymore. Does C.S. Joseph also claim he's an ENTP? He does make that claim. It's a false claim he's making. He is definitely not an ENTP, but he does make that claim. And you can see what an ENTP looks like by spending some time around my channel, looking at the various videos I've uploaded and stuff. I've got a lot of songs. I've got a lot of live streams talking about random shit, stuff about politics, stuff about being a debate coach, stuff about cognitive functions. A lot of good NETI stuff. C.S. Joseph has a lot of TE. A whole lot of TE. Yes, he has some extroverted intuition, which makes me think he's an ESTJ. Michelle Way. Michelle Way. Replace C.S. Joseph says with, I pulled a random card out of a bowl that said ENFJ. Now, you may actually be an ENFJ or an INFJ, but whatever C.S. Joseph says about that matter is completely irrelevant to your type. So we can't rely on him to really type people correctly because we have ample instances of him typing people dramatically wrong. For example, I believe he typed Naruto as an INFJ. Naruto is an ESFP by any understanding of cognitive functions. Well, he doesn't know what he is. He doesn't know what his father is. He has no idea what he is or anything about cognitive functions. Now, I will grant you this. His online test, if you've ever taken it, his online test tested me as ENTP rogue. Like just about every other cognitive function test I've ever taken has tested me as ENTP. C.S. Joseph, on the other hand, claims that he spent most of his childhood in his INTJ shadow. What that means, nobody knows. He definitely didn't spend most of his childhood attending via some cognitive functions and then suddenly switch after 12 years to another form of being. It doesn't work like that. I wasn't left-handed for my first 5 years, then right-handed for my next 5 years, then left-handed again. It doesn't work like that. The definition of personality are those aspects of the self that don't change across time. So, obviously, if he's claiming that his personality has undergone these dramatic changes over time and that you can master cognitive functions and become the ultimate cognitive function master or something using all functions consciously, he's just a little child in pretend land. He's got no concept of what he's talking about. A way of paying attention is defined as as something to the exclusion of other things. So it's a simple idea, right? The fact that I'm constantly making new videos, making live streams, talking things out, and coming up with stuff to say on the fly, answering questions, all of that stuff is irrelevant. He made his decision on my type based on mere minutes of a Skype video. Okay, so Michelle, if I type somebody, I talk to them face-to-face for an hour, ask them a lot of questions, I follow up to see, I explain why it is I think this is representative of that and not something else, and exactly what everything means and why. I make a very strong case at the end, and I'll tell you exactly how strong the case is as well. So more often than not, I'm able to say I'm very close to 100% that you're this. Occasionally I'll say you're either this or this, and I'm about 80% that you're very, very rarely do I have trouble getting down to two types. Sometimes it's difficult to tell between the extrovert and the introvert of a type. And then there are other types that are confusable for other types. So in other words, like it can be challenging to distinguish an ISFJ from an INFJ sometimes, if they've got, because 8th slot is pretty demonstrative. Yes, I made it clear to it hasn't come up again actually. Cool. I'll answer it as soon as I'm done live streaming. So the thing is also then, for people who decide and choose to have their videos made public and there's no requirement to do so, I have a typing later this morning where the person is not going to upload it publicly, and that's fine. It's totally up to the client. But a lot of them are published. So the other thing is, what I do that most typists don't do is I put my sessions up publicly for everyone to see. That only if the client wants that and is okay with that. If they don't want that or are not okay with it, then I don't. But a lot of clients do want that and are okay with it. And so I get to publish those. What does that mean? I get to hear everybody's critiques, and I get to read a bunch of comments, and people can judge for themselves, When you put everything up for public scrutiny all the time and acknowledge that to the extent that you are wrong, you want to be corrected so that you can be less wrong. To the extent that your model doesn't make sense or that you want it to make sense. To the extent that people don't understand why meow is meow, you're willing to explain it. To the extent that somebody wants to challenge you, you're willing to answer that challenge directly and on point. The thing is, C.S. Joseph doesn't do any of that stuff. I do it consistently and have done it consistently from the beginning. So as a consequence, I'm, in my opinion, and I believe it to be the correct opinion, by far the best typologist. I think I understand functions best, and I think I am most experienced and best at actually typing people. I have actually put in hundreds and hundreds of hours into doing so professionally, and something NI people sometimes undervalue is experience. Like INFJs, well, like Opaloid came in and sort of understood the potential of INFJ ENTP video making together, but didn't understand the value or significance of all that I had done before that. So he didn't quite get the idea that the value of a YouTube channel links to a YouTube channel is everything that it has done, and it's possible to add on to that pile, but you can't without deleting a bunch of stuff and doing a bunch of arbitrary weirdness. You can't change what a channel is fundamentally without just start having a different channel, you know? So it's like, there's also a sense that, you know, well, I can bring something that's so particularly valuable to this, but it's, in a sense, it's underestimating the importance of the investment that in time of myself and viewers. So when it comes to typing people, experience is important, but it's a necessary but insufficient condition to being successful at it. If you have a lot of experience typing wrong, then you're going to be terrible at it. Like, if you put a lot of energy into I mean, I don't always need a full hour. Usually I probably got the person down by 30 minutes, but sometimes I do. And even if I don't have even if I do have it down after like 30 minutes or something, there's always plenty of opportunity for me to double check, triple check, and or answer their questions and stuff like that. So it's definitely an hour is the right time. It's the right amount of time. There are two kinds of channels: those who prioritize content for everyone, and those who prioritize content for themselves. Well, I think there are two kinds of channels: those who want to make money and those who want to make media. You know, I want to make media, and I do. I make a lot of media. I'd like to make money, but that's not the driving force behind it. C.S. Joseph, his YouTube channel is there to make him money. And so on his own metric, he's quite successful with typing people the way he does. It maximizes revenue. And he's quite happy with it being something that's non-falsifiable, it's just everybody's opinion anyway, so he can't really be called out. And so to avoid that, he avoids engaging about the legitimacy of what he thinks about typing and cognitive functions. He would never in a billion years debate me about it. I'm not actually depressed, Army Forever. That's just my thumbnail. It's a thumbnail that would be consistent with the topic of sensitivity. Being sensitive leads to cognitive dissonance as one chooses to ignore the facts evidence merely because of feeling butthurt. Okay. Radhika Chakrabarty, I'm going to guess that you are not an FI user. Could you possibly be TI tool? That sounds like a TI tool statement right there. Shitting on feelings is a popular activity around here. So what you're doing there is not does not run afoul of general values around here. However, this particular video, I'm trying to say that it's good to be sensitive, that it's fine to be sensitive, that we need to make a distinguish, but we need to distinguish between people who are actually sensitive and people who are instead politically outraged. Yeah, Boba Fett. I mean, I hear these kind of suggestions all the time. Everything requires time and energy. I could do that with relatively little time and energy, I suppose. And I probably should. That's probably about the best idea of what I could do right now to maximize outcomes. But the thing is this: see, it's probably what I'd have to do because, even though in some sense it would make more sense to simply start doing that here, I won't. So I'd have to do what you say right there. I just keep doing what I'm doing here, regardless of whatever else I do here, and I just continue to be a pile of mishmash. Do ENTPs get annoyed by people who are high FI users? It depends. I think that the conflicts occur most when you've got it in the tool function. So TI tool will get into a lot of conflicts with FI tool. TI tool won't get into nearly as many conflicts with FI DOM. And same thing with TI DOM and FI tool. But it's when they're both in the tool function there's a lot of conflict because both parties are trying to use their deliberation metric as the basic tool to go about life. And they keep running afoul of the other person's conclusions as a consequence because they're using the opposite deliberation metric. Now, it's true that FI, as Radhika Chakrabarti indicates here, can indeed cause one to ignore the facts evidence because of what they want to be true rather than because of what is true from a disinterested calculus. The thing is, different circumstances are best suited to one or the other deliberation approach. If I'm trying to determine who I'm going to be in a relationship with, how I feel is very important. And I might be able to come up with logical equivalents such as, well, these are the things I want in a relationship partner. She needs to be meow, 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 meow. But that's not going to be an effective heuristic for, do I like the person? Do I find them hot? On the other hand, if we're talking about public policy, and the thing is, most kind of conversations here on the internet are not really about, should I get with Dave or should I get with Bob? They're more about public matters. Well, then we want people to use, ideally, a disinterested calculus, which is to say, let's put aside our feelings and calculate what makes the most sense. And then we can include our feelings and discuss how important things are to us and whether or not, even though this makes the most sense, we shouldn't do it because of what's most important to us. I mean, I'd like to think my explanations actually answer people's questions. I don't think C.S. Joseph actually answers any meaningful questions about cognitive functions. He likes to answer questions about, like this: what's the best meow for a meow type? He likes to answer questions like that. I prefer to answer questions like, can you explain more how the ISFJ uses introverted intuition? Or can you explain more what introverted intuition is? Like, C.S. Joseph has some weird definitions about shit, right? Introverted intuition is intuition. what we normally call intuition. Extroverted intuition is something else. When Sherlock Holmes goes to a crime scene and sees a bunch of clues and goes, aha, it was the gardener who's guilty. And Watson goes, but how could you possibly know this? And Sherlock Holmes says, elementary, my dear Watson. Well, what's happened there is Sherlock Holmes has attended to the matter via introverted intuition, probably throughout the thing, which means he's in a receive mode. He's receiving information from the world and not deliberating on that information, not metabolizing it, but it's just sort of landing in his head. And when enough clues come into place that it suggests a certain pattern, that pattern will, oh, it's a meow. And then he'll say, I figured it out all of a sudden, right? There's no deliberation process. It's a aha moment. That's introverted intuition. I think that for anybody to be talking about cognitive functions, to meaningfully talk about a function at all in isolation, you're going to have to start by agreeing with me on information directionality. In other words, knowledge functions are receive functions. You just know something all of a sudden. There's no process involved in knowing that we can observe. Like if I remember, as I do right now, that the coffee pot's empty. I need to make a new pot of coffee. This is heated up from yesterday. I just know that. It doesn't require me to process through something. So, and it's also the case that if you give me a set of logical arguments and ask me if it's valid, I'm going to have to look at it and work through it, process it, deliberate, do the TI process on it, and then provide you the answer. So deliberation functions then are processes of drawing conclusions, whereas knowledge functions are somehow the identity providing the self the conclusion appropriate to a given circumstance, right? Action functions, extroverted intuition. Well, it's taking action, but it's taking action with words. And extroverted sensing, it's taking action, but not with words. Now, the thing is, when I say not with words, I want to be clear that filling out that paperwork you need to fill out to get that thing that you're trying to get is a form of extroverted sensing. And it might include writing down words. But you're not generating those words. You're just providing the answers on this questionnaire or whatever. Let's say you're an ESTP and you're applying for something that requires for you to demonstrate a holistic roundness. And so in addition to your various accolades and accomplishments, they want you to write a poem. Well, you will be able to generate one with your 8-slot extroverted intuition. You'll come up with some random shit and send them a poem. So yeah, I can do sort of random creativity as well. Okay. Because that's 8-slot. However, if you're an ISTP and completing this application packet requires you to make up a random poem about pineapples, aardvarks, and the Sears Tower. Well, you're going to really struggle with that part of it, right? So that shows you how it's conceivably possible to isolate the action functions from each other when you plug in the person as being somebody with one as a polar. Now, the last kind of functions is the interface functions. The interface functions, I personally feel I understand least well. because they are basically a combination of action and deliberation, kind of on the fly, paired always with knowledge function. So in other words, to interact with a dynamic system is to rely a lot more on knowledge and a lot less on deliberation. Because let's say we are okay, let's say there's a power line is falling down and it's snaking around the ground going zzz, 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 like that, right? That's a dynamic system problem. And the way the TE deals with that dynamic system problem is it goes and assesses first, right? And knows what needs to be concerned about. So somebody who TEs that will go there, look at this thing, and consider ordinalities. So, okay, the first thing we should do is shut off power to this thing. Don't run up and try to grab it and stop it from flopping around, right? That's TE. In the worst case scenario, you're TE polar. I wonder who you're talking about. I don't know what Bo was talking about. I don't think Trump's an ESTP. Eric, as an ISFP, is there a function explanation for why I can't get anything done unless there is an alarming urgent deadline? I would suspect it's as simple as you don't want to. You're doing stuff you don't want to do. As an FI Dom, you very clearly understand that you don't want to do it. I think if you were doing stuff that you did want to do, then you wouldn't have that experience. When you're deciding a relationship, do you really decide with feelings over TI? I mean, I typically haven't. Typically, I have used TI, or actually more properly, I guess, a TE frame. Like my first wife, I married because I wanted to have a child, and she was willing to marry me, and one of the big things I noted was she had good childbearing hips. We obviously didn't last very long. She cheated on me. She was gone before Delilah was 3 years old. And then I proceeded to get a woman who would be a good mother for Delilah. And she was. She was not attractive, but she was an excellent ESFJ mother who mothered Delilah for the next 15 years. Of course, once Delilah was no longer a child, that relationship didn't work. So I left that relationship. And then the next relationship that I got in was very short term, like kind of not really a relationship. It just sort of a friend with benefit kind of thing. And then after that, I got in a relationship with an INFP who I wasn't making any decisions in that relationship. I think it's fair to say, I'm not trying to absolve myself of responsibility, but I think it's fair to say that she was an adult and I was a child in terms of fully informed consent. I guess it's like your supervisor has a lot of advantages over you, your supervisor type, and she had my emotions going all over the fucking place. I don't know what kind of decisions I was making. Then after that, I got with an ISFJ. There was good function compatibility, and that was again kind of a TE decision. I wanted to get a woman and proceed forward with my plans with my business and get the dating thing done with. And the housing thing worked out really well. Like her son wanted to move out, but she couldn't afford that house by herself. It allowed me to leave a house that I was alone in now for the first time. I had rented for 20 years. I moved in with her. A lot of practicality reasons, right? But this relationship is driven by FI for sure. So when Rachel and I started talking, my thought was, okay, you know what? I'm going to play big pimp here for a while. I'm going to talk to this chick. She's going to fly out here. We're going to spend a week together, whatever. I'm going to fuck her. She'll go back to New York. And then I'll find, a different chick to do the same thing with. But the thing is, after I started talking to her for a day or two, I went into what's known as a state of limerence. If you Google the word limerence, it refers to this state of odd, incredible infatuation, obsession with this other person. It's not necessarily requited. In this instance, it definitely was requited. For a long time before she actually got here, and we were just talking and stuff, I just, like, that whole week or so, I spent sort of finding myself saying the name Rachel Apollosa in my head all day long. I was consumed by my FI at that point. And in fact, when she got here, things were up and down for a while, but it was because she was still trying to manage her mental health correctly. So she has bipolar mania that's, I guess you'd say, in remission at this point. But when we first were together, it wasn't very well managed with medication. The medication she was being given was not the right combination of medication, and the people she was dealing with as medical professionals simply were not listening to her or taking her seriously, and kept insisting that the problem was her smoking pot. So anyway, after some, it's like, for a variety of complicated reasons, she didn't end up going back to New York and stayed here through Christmas. And at Christmas, she had a full-blown psychotic break. Full-blown psychotic break. Like, just completely batshit crazy. Thought her family was having sex in my dad's car, and so went into the garage and put the hose in my dad's car and hosed all around the garage and broke the garage door opener and left the hose running on the floor of the garage, and came back, went out and walking the streets in the middle of the night, and came back with the cops following her. And it was just like, full blast psychotic break. Okay. So at that point I thought, okay, I'm done. I can't be with this chick. This chick's fucking nuts. It's like, it doesn't matter if I like her a lot or whatever. She was not on any drugs. I wish she were on drugs. The only drug she was marijuana. Didn't matter how much pot she smoked. She would just get crazier. It's like she would never get sleepy. She never slept. She didn't sleep for like a week, That's what bipolar mania means. It was the manic part, right? And then when she doesn't sleep for a week, she goes fucking crazy. Anyway, yeah. So during that period of time, I was trying to get her to a hospital, and at one point I was just like, it was such a drain on me. I just needed a break, and I was gonna go. I left her at this one hospital to just stay here. I'm gonna go back to the house. I got to get a couple of things. I need to chill for a second. I'm gonna pull a bummer. I'll be back. Okay. And then the hospital calls me when I'm home that she bailed, and that's when I realized how important she was. So, I envisioned her walking the streets, cold, unequipped with anything but the clothes she had on, and it really hurt my soul a great deal. So I drove around the hospital. I couldn't find her. I was yelling out the window for her and stuff. And then I went back to the hospital, and she was just in a different section of the hospital. She hadn't actually left the hospital. And, the only thing she was clinging to is, I want Eric. I need Eric because I trust Eric. And I bailed and left her there, and I guess that's when I realized I wasn't going to break up with her, So we got her into a different hospital took her, and finally, and it was a moment where, it's like, it was always a struggle getting her to go to the hospital. She didn't want to go in there, and then I took her in there, and we got sort of signed in, and then she went back outside, and they said, okay, we're ready for her, and she didn't want to go back inside, and I was just like, you got it. And she went in there, and she did what she had to do to get them to commit her, basically, which is act dangerous without actually being dangerous or hitting anybody. And then they took over, and she ended up getting admitted, not involuntarily. So they managed to avoid that as well, which is nice. And when she came out, she was very drugged up, and I couldn't take her back home at this point because I'd been, driving around for a couple of days at this point, dealing with this shit, and hadn't yet really dealt with my dad and talked to him about what had happened to his garage and his car and stuff. So I still had that to do. My dad was incredibly cool about the whole thing, but I knew I wasn't even going to bother saying, well, can she still stay here with me? So she went back to New York. But my dad we'd already planned to go to Hawaii together in February. And my dad did understand that her behavior was not her. She had a mental illness. So she went with us to Hawaii in February, and that was fantastic. It was a fantastic trip by everybody's standards. Rachel and I had a fantastic time. My dad enjoyed everyone's company. It was great. So then we came back just in time for COVID, and there was this. She had, basically, her parents had sold her family home to her brother, who was taking an approach of be an extreme dick to Rachel about everything, and until I guess she was forced out, or what he eventually did was just say, you have to leave. So at that point, I had to take her back in. But this time, what I did was hire a private psychiatrist, and his name is Dr. Ingram. We had a first psychiatry meeting in which poor Dr. Ingram got grilled on the stand by host Eric. So basically, I asked him a whole bunch of questions, none of which he could answer to my satisfaction. And then I stood there with my hands on my hips and scolded the psychiatry profession. And then, yeah, I hear you, first of all. Fine. I got you. I hear you. Things are in the works here. I've kind of been, my order of operations. The next thing of my order of operations is my teeth, which is coming up this Saturday. And I've got a couple things to do today in preparation for that. I'm going to go to the bank and get a cashier's check and whatever. All right. So anyway, let me finish my Rachel story. Okay. So the first thing that the doctor did was cure her insomnia. So what I kept saying is this consistently links to her incredible challenge of sleeping. She really does not sleep well. So why don't you give her a sleeping pill? And I get it, Horseman. Look, I don't need any further instruction as to how to succeed. I understand this concept you're saying, and I agree with the concept. And I know exactly how to do it. It's not a lack of knowledge of how to make videos people want to watch, right? So anyway, what the doctor ended up doing was prescribing for Rachel Klonopin. And she went off lithium. She went off the Seroquel that she was on, lithium and Seroquel, and something else that she was taking. And he put her on Klonopin to go to sleep at night. Just not a lot of it, just a little bit. And it worked like magic. She was sleeping great. Except now, all of a sudden, she was seriously depressed. It's like, what the fuck? Because I was convinced going into this psychiatry thing that I had figured it out. The problem was she just needed a sleeping pill to go to sleep at night and she'd be fine. And that was the end and beginning of all of this problem. Well, I was wrong. We solved the sleeping problem and she was still crazy. And then within another 2 sessions, the doctor had coordinated her medication such that she took Klonopin to go to sleep, Olanzapine, which is like a general like antipsychotic or something like that, and then Prozac. And as soon as we put those combinations of drugs together, like within 6 hours of taking them, it was just like, boom, completely sane. And she's been that way ever since. It was absolutely amazing. I mean, I felt incredibly vindicated, but I imagine Rachel feels way more vindicated than I could ever feel. She spent 10 years getting fucked around by a bullshit psychiatric system. No, that's not the moral of the story of The Flash. Because nowadays, every time we see Dr. Angrier, I say, all praises due my hero, you know? Okay, what else can I say? She spent 10 years in the care of Mercy Medical Center that was giving her continual ongoing treatments for cannabis addiction, of all things. Continually prescribing her drugs that weren't really working, but were managing but not fixing the problem. And insisting she go to these talk therapy groups and stuff. She had like this crazy camp or whatever that she had to go to back when she was back in New York briefly, which is like this day camp for people with mental illness or something. Like, this is what she's been going through for 10 years. Every time she smoked pot, everybody would scream at her. If she smoked pot like in the house, her parents would try to do this TE bullshit like, well, now you're punished in the following way. You know, okay, I get that I'm a 30-year-old crazy woman living at home, but, you know, and so I don't really have any claim to be treated any particular way, but why are you treating me like this? You know, is the basic thing she must have been thinking. When I met her, and She didn't mislead me at all about the shit going on with her. I was appalled to hear about what was going on. The thing is, now she's completely won all those arguments. So you will never hear any member of her family bring up her pot smoking again, because they insisted for 10 years that was a critical part of the problem. It turned out the problem was everything they were doing. I mean, the right psychiatrist solved it in 3 sessions. Now, we still meet with him periodically to make sure it's still working. Last time we met with him, he indicated actually that it's not just to check on Rachel. He likes us. And at the end of the session, after I gave him my normal, you're our hero talk, he said, thanks, I needed that today. So maybe he was having a rough day. I don't know. But he cured Rachel. And it's like, there were a lot of people who were telling me this is the wrong relationship when she was crazy. You've got to get out of this relationship or whatever. A lot of people telling, there was this whole movement. Every month, Eric, we have this fight again. You have this fight with Rachel every month at least, where she says that, she keeps getting out of the boat. You said you weren't going to tolerate boat get out of hers. And here you are doing it again. And, it's like not much I could say about that, because I agree that it was unacceptable, but I didn't want to give up on Rachel. I loved Rachel, And so it's very vindicating to be proved right for once. Every instance in the past, I would probably have had the same sort of attitude as I did with Kimberly, but I've always been wrong in the past. But this time I was right. It's a response to this thing here. I guess it's in response to the question, is Rachel receiving treatment now, in part by you, the Flash? And in response to Spencer Jones's comment, sounds like drugs. Maybe it's not actually important to you, The purpose and moral of the story is to say that FI is relevant. FI is important. It's good to be sensitive. So if I were less sensitive, I would have gotten rid of Rachel much sooner, because she was a hassle, a big hassle for a while. But I'm sensitive, and the main reason I couldn't do that is because the thought of hurting her, like, I had plenty of good excuses whereby neither she nor anybody else could complain about my decision and say I didn't give her enough chance, or I didn't take it seriously enough, or anything like that. So I was already safe argumentationally. But what I couldn't tolerate was the idea of of taking action that I knew might be consistent with what she's saying right now, but was not consistent with her long-term actual wishes or interests. Don't you feel exhausted not getting your any function fulfilled by your partner? Your deep, abstract inner world of knowledge you take a great pride at. A deep, abstract inner world of knowledge is not extroverted intuition. That's introverted intuition. I appreciate Rachel's deep, abstract inner world of knowledge because it means she picks up on a lot of the same kinds of meanings that I do, that are implied meanings, I guess, unstated meanings, additional meanings that a given straightforward interpretation infers. She's good at subtext. She likes the same media that I like. She's helped me to appreciate watching media more instead of just making media all the time. And most importantly, being an extroverted intuitor means I like to talk a lot. So I need to be with somebody who prefers to listen a lot. And that's why being with an INFJ makes good sense. Receivers prefer to receive. Putters prefer to put. So a putter being with a receiver makes good sense, right? It's like a quarterback being with a receiver. Rachel naturally ignores and values all the different possible things. So one of the risks of being an NI-DOM is you can get too consumed by the clarity of your truth to recognize that there are a variety of ways to get out of it if it's a bad truth. In contrast, I can think of a variety of ways to get out of a bad truth when I should just acknowledge it. For example, the example I've used before, and it's a great example is why I use it, is the time Rachel and I went fishing. I picked a bad spot. A big spot that Rachel kept getting the line up into the tree. And I kept trying to think of ways to alter the current reality to make this spot acceptable. And she said, we should move. And I said, what? We could do that. Wait, hold on a second. Yes, you're right. We should move. No, well, I mean, remember, truth isn't universal, Flash. Validity is universal, but truth is frame contextual. So what's true within a given frame may not be true within another frame. True can be conditionally certain. You can say something is conditionally true. In other words, if all pigs have wings and this is a pig, then it has wings, right? That's conditionally true, but and it's valid, but the conclusion is false, right? So truth is a rather complex label. Generally, it's absolute within a frame and relative between frames, unlike validity, which is universally absolute. So if A, then B, and A, therefore B, is universally valid. If A, then B, and B, therefore A, is universally invalid. Because it doesn't matter what words you put in there, true or false, they're always going to be the same validity or invalidity. We have a term called sound, which means something is both valid and true. But whereas we can, but it's kind of like saying the winner is the person who is most fastest and most beautiful. We can measure one, but we can't measure the other, ENFP are the best mirrors, hence just as free bird as we are twin flame like energy. I mean, I have a mixed relationship with ENFPs. So an ENFP and I, if we're just joking back and forth, then we can get along really well and can be practically indistinguishable from one another. However, we start talking about matters that ought to universally validate, like public policy, then we're going to come into stark conflict, because ENFPs are likely to both have opinions about public policy and be unable to justify those opinions. They have advocacies about public policy without having done the calculation as to whether this universally validates. After all, you're trying to force it on everybody. So that causes a lot of problems. I think truth is determined. Validity is implicit to language, and truth is determined. It's neither discovered nor created. It's determined within a given context. So, is it true that I'm poor? Well, I mean, kind of. You know, I'm not rich, but in terms of access to things I need, you might say I am. You know, I don't have a lot of liquid funds to spend on things I want to spend on if I don't really want to buy anything, but I'm not in need, you know. Truth is revealed by whom? I mean, we make different statements, or statements talk about different things. Okay, so yeah, Rachel's an INFJ. Statements talk about different things. If I say I went to the store yesterday, well, there's two kinds of poor. There's absolute poverty and relative poverty. Absolute poverty is defined as something like less than $2 a day. Relative poverty is defined in terms of the gap between the richest and the poorest, and it's often they use this thing called the Gini index. Okay, but I mean, for example, if you and I are disputing a given position, Spencer Jones, let's say your position is that mask wearing should be mandatory for everybody, and my position is that mask wearing should be left up to the individual. Let's say at the end of it, we agree that you are correct. Does that mean you revealed the truth? Let's say at the end of it, we disagree. Does that mean that neither thing is true? Let's say at the end of it, we determine some third option. Who revealed it? I'm not sure. Okay. Well, so the thing is, there's a lot of points that are easily determined the truth of, and a lot of points that are very difficult to determine the truth of. So it's like, if I'm talking about something that is very concrete, objective data that everyone can access, and I'm making simple claims about it, okay, well, objective truth, okay. Objective and subjective. Okay. So if you're looking at the screen right now, this box comprises objective data. It's data that everybody can access, at least the physical things about it, independently, okay? So if I say this is a cigarette box, Marlboro Red cigarette box, that is objectively, we will likely all agree that is objectively true. Why? Because we all have access to the data equally. Namely, we can all see the box the same. And we know what it looks like, and we know what this is when we look at it. So we're going to agree that it is objectively true that this is a cigarette box. Because the statement I'm making is a claim about the identity of something that is in evidence. Okay? So if I'm making claims about the identity of something in evidence, and the identity that I'm claiming is very is limited. So in other words, I'm saying this is a cigarette box, Marlboro red cigarette box. I'm not saying this is the red cigarette box we found at the scene of the crime. That's a claim that requires more substantiation. So I guess the mistake Spencer Jones in talking about truth is that it forgets the number one rule, which is there are different kinds of claims, and we can declare them substantiated or not, but the standard by which something is substantiated depends on the kind of claim that's being made. So if I make a descriptive claim about evidence, about an object in evidence, those claims are very easy to determine. If I make a prescriptive claim about whether or not you should do something because it's in your interests, well, some of those are more objectively determinable than others. So if I tell you, oh, you've got a headache, you should take 2 aspirin, that's a prescriptive statement. You should take 2 aspirin. I'm not saying you're morally required to take 2 aspirin. That would be a normative statement. I'm saying it's in your interest to take 2 aspirins if you don't like having your headache. So whether or not taking 2 aspirins is a good idea depends on a couple of things, right? It assumes you're a regular person, that you don't have a very sensitive stomach. If you have a very sensitive stomach, you might say, oh, I can't take aspirin. I need to take Tylenol instead. Regardless, is it objectively true that you should take 2 aspirin? Well, that's a trickier question, right? It kind of depends on the situation of the person. No longer are we making a statement about an object in evidence, right? The evidence there that is subjective. The fact that you have a headache is data only you can access. So that makes it subjective data. Since I can't feel what your head feels like to check, well, let me feel your head's feeling for a second. Oh, yeah, you do have a headache. And it's this sort of headache. Well, I prescribe the following. Since we can't do that, we're dealing with subjective data. Can we make objective statements about subjective data? Yes, possibly. Is it objectively true that someone with a headache is well served to take aspirin? In general, but not always, right? So, and if you say, well, in general, then that statement's true, right? Well, yeah, probably. I mean, sure. I think that we would broadly agree that it's true based on the fact that there's broad agreement that there's sufficient objective evidence that aspirin reduces the feeling of a headache. So now let's talk instead about a normative truth. If I say you are morally prohibited from stabbing me because I called you poop head, I'll get to your point there in a second, Rand. You're not doing anything there. You're just replacing one word with another word that has the exact same qualities to it. So the thing is, if I were to say, it's morally prohibited for you to do this, that to me is objectively true, because the standard by which we can determine moral prohibition is a negative rights kind of a thing rather than a positive indication, and we can universalize negative moral prohibitions. It's always prohibited for you to maim toddlers. There's never a good enough reason to maim a toddler. The thing about that kind of moral framework is people will try to argue against it by saying, well, let's say you have a terrorist who has planted a nuclear bomb with a timer on it for a day, and you've got a day to find it. Is it okay to torture him to get the information? A lot of people will say yes, because you're saving so many lives by torturing just one person. Well, but then you say, he's such a fanatic, he won't give up the information. But you've got his kid there. Now, is it okay to torture his kid in front of him to get him to give up the information? People get a little bit more squeamish. So the reason we say it's never okay to torture is because if it's sometimes okay to torture, it's basically always okay to torture. So, okay, let me talk about now. I will get back to sensitivity in a bit, but let me get back to Rain's thing here. If you ask, is it beneficial for you to take 2 aspirins? That's an easier question. When you bring should into it, it's not quite as substantiatable. Well, I guess there's an implicit if, okay? So if I say you should take 2 aspirins, I'm saying if you want your headache to diminish, you should take 2 aspirins. There's sort of some skipped steps there. Oh, I got a headache. You should take a couple aspirins. If we were to lay it all out, it would be, I present subjective data, headache. The other party goes, I don't dispute your subjective data because knowing that only you have access to the evidence, I will always lose that argument. And then says, additionally, I will afford your statement the status of true, and I will afford your statement additionally a status of problem. So I'm going to engage in one of several interactive approaches regarding this. Option 1, commiserate. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's what Rachel would do if I told her I had a headache. Option 2, solve. You should take 2 aspirins. Now, in that instance, what I'm really saying is, assuming you actually do have a headache, and assuming you don't want to have a headache, then if you take the following action, it makes it less likely for you to have a headache. Right. So when you represent stuff with conditional logic, a lot of times you have to put in things that aren't necessarily actually included. So I might say, if you go to the store, get some cheese. I don't include the then, but it's still a conditional. And we use a lot of different words to mean and. In normal language, when we use or, we usually mean one or the other and not both. But in logic, when we use or, it means one or the other or both. Because being objective means renouncing all value systems. Nirvana is real objectivity, which hypothetically Buddha obtained. I mean, no, being objective doesn't mean renouncing all value systems. Not at all. I mean, my point is that, in fact, a person's negative moral obligations are, in fact, objectively determinable. Okay, so it is universally and objectively so that it's not okay for me to rape you. It's because it's because all basic rights stem from ownership. Everyone's born owning their own body. If you accept that notion that you're born owning your own body and that nobody else can take ownership of your body, then negative rights naturally follow from that objectively. However, it is true that you cannot use objectivity to make determinations about positive moral indications. So it is very much the case that it is objectively so what you ought not do. And it is very much the case that it is not objectively so what you ought to do. So in my opinion, and it is the correct opinion, it's important to have some kind of magical framework to allow you to understand yourself, not only in terms of a person who's susceptible to sinning, but additionally the person who's susceptible to winning. In other words, without a magical thinking frame, you have no destiny. You have no purpose. You just have time until you die. So that's the correct understanding of spirituality, morality, whatever, and objectivity. It's no team wins on every field. That's what it boils down to. TI doesn't win on every field. I can't know what my destiny is with logic. I have to trust in God to know what my destiny is. I can't win love by just fixing a girl's various problems all the time. You know, I need to. TE is no replacement for caring about the other person. Okay, you can reject my position on morality and truth, but at least call it a position. The difference between an opinion and a position is that a position is well justified. In other words, I provided a lot of substantiation as to why this is the case. I pointed out that, first of all, it's conditionally the case. Assuming we agree that slavery is morally wrong. If we agree with that, then the objective negative moral prohibitions all logically follow. That's not, you may disagree that matters, but you can't disagree that that's true. Okay, well, Army Forever, this channel, we do talk a lot about philosophy and ideas and stuff, and not as much about feelings. I know the title of this one is supposed to be about feelings, but I'm also trying to demonstrate being sensitive here in this instance, which is to say, I don't want audience members to be bored, and I also don't want people to walk away with the wrong impression. You know, you can avoid nihilism without magical frameworks, and you can find purpose in secular things. Sure, that's true, but that's not quite the same thing as a destiny, right? Like, I believe myself to have a destiny. That is to say, I will either fulfill God's plan for me or fail to fulfill it. That's a different kind of purpose than the one that you can find in secular means, because it assumes that there's a standard you have to meet that you don't actually know and you can't actually see, but that some external magical being has in mind for you. There are no Biden fans, Boba Fett. There are anti-Trump people and there are Trump fanatics, but I'll call the anti-Trump fanatics as well. You know, plenty of anti-Trump fanatics. There's some Trump fanatics, and there's a lot of people who just don't like Trump and aren't really obsessed with it. And there's very few people who like Biden. So, in fact, in the video I made the other day, I took a video of 2 Biden-Harris signs. I was like, boy, you don't see that very often. I've seen shit tons of anti-Trump stuff around here. In Southern California, the vast majority of political signage that you'll see, I saw going up into the election, was anti-Trump stuff. But I would put it more like God understands what it means to optimally fulfill my potential as a human being, as a flawed human being. And I am making an attempt to have my understanding of what that is align best with his. Okay, let's go back to the issue of sensitivity. So my basic position here is that yes, sensitivity is good. That rationalists have a habit of shitting on sensitivity, and that in fact what we need to be doing in general is recognizing that different contexts require different value approaches and different attentional approaches, or are best served by different attentional approaches. So I feel like I'm a very sensitive person. I get very disturbed by media that shows suffering, depending on the kind of suffering it is, and if it's something that really hurts my heart, then it'll stick with me for a long time. I'm sensitive when it comes to stuff my girlfriend says to me. Like, I need her to say nice things to me, not mean things, because I'll internalize those. Other people, I tend to not be sensitive about. Like, people around here try to attack me all the time, and it doesn't really, you just kind of roll right off me. Occasionally something will stick, and it'll occupy headspace between live streams. When that happens, I come back live stream again and say, I can't believe this fucker has occupied my headspace. But by and large, I'm insensitive towards public discourse, and I'm sensitive in private discourse. Now, I don't have much private discourse because with Rachel, most of the stuff we talk about that's private, quote unquote, is just, I love you too. I'm glad you're my girlfriend. I'm glad you're, just like being nice, saying nice things to each other. It's not anything like, it's not a big, we don't have a big secret personal private life, No, I wouldn't say I'm insensitive in public as a defense mechanism. I'd say I'm insensitive in public because of what my natural frame is. So my natural frame is insensitivity, which is to say words are used to determine things, not to express yourself, right? Basically people have two perspectives, that words are to say things or words are to talk to people. My native frame of reference is words are to say things. And that when I'm talking to people, they're saying things and expect me to respond to those things based on the legitimacy of what's being said. This makes a TI tool user means they can be quite pedantic and contrary. So, I remember hanging out with my former student, David Dosh, who's now a debate coach himself. And every time I made a statement, he'd like say, well, parts 1 and 2 of this are correct, but part 3 actually blah, 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 blah. And I just sort of observed it for a while and finally said, do you know you're doing this? It's like, you don't let anything pass that doesn't get some part of it critiqued. I know I do that to a certain extent as well. So people say something that's like, so Eric, would you say that man is correct? And I'll generally go, more or less. I might take exception with this part here. It's rare that I say, although I'm a lot more self-aware than my former student was at the time when he was a college student. But now when I do encounter something where I totally agree with it, I try to just come full down on the side of, yes, that's exactly right. But the thing is, I have come to understand that when I'm talking to people in public as well, that I have to remember they have their own approaches towards language that sometimes are not the same as mine. So for FI users, a lot of times they tend to associate their political positions with their identity. So if words are meant to say things in public, what difference does it make if they're said to you in private, regardless of tone used? Well, no, I agree with you, Flash. I mean, people default to their inherent frames of reference in all contexts, even though that inherent frame of reference is more appropriately used in some contexts than others. Metacognition, at least for an ENTP or other meta-analysts, is the way that we grow. So I'm able to recognize that I'm applying my habituated ways of being as a value and imposing that on everything, So I try not to. What that means is being aware and making a willful decision to remember that the thing I disagree with may be somebody's cherished position, and to try to dispute it in a way that's less wholly shitting on it, you know? No, Flash, what I'm trying to say to you is, in fact, I am aware and willful when I can be, but like everyone, I default to my reflexes. You want this to be subconscious defense mechanism. I'm telling you, no, fortunately, while it is true that we all have our reflexive natures that we continually return to, with sufficient metacognition and awareness, we can value those aspects of attention that naturally run afoul of our configuration. Okay? So it's not a defense mechanism or anything like that. My native function stack is extroverted intuition, introverted thinking. That means coming up with a lot of ideas, talking a lot, and making sure that everything I'm saying is logically correct. In other words, I check myself all the time, and I also check others all the time for logical correctness. I do that naturally in my relationship as well. One of the differences between my relationship and this conversation here is I'm much less likely to correct in my relationship. If there is some sort of inconsistency, like let's say Rachel uses the wrong word. She means meow, but she says meow. Only some of the time will I correct her. And only when I think she wants to be corrected, she'd like to know. Or that it's a risk for her socially or something. Rachel's has a lot of positions about astrology and stuff that don't validate on a TI level. But the reason, well, thanks, Fraser M. The reason I don't shit on those things is because I recognize that for her, they validate on an NI level. And she uses FE, so she's not inherently a rationalist. And she likes the idea of external patterns helping her to better understand her actual experience. She doesn't know experientially as a default way of knowing. It's her A-slot function. So she feels most comfortable like knowing that she and I are good and we're going to be together forever because the stars say so, or because the tarot cards say so. That's in some sense a more satisfying reason for her than because her experience tells her that we're great together and there's no reason why we'd ever split, you know? So it's really about, it's not so much public-private as it is the nature of the relationship is somewhat defined by the nature of the form, right? It's like this form means that I'm not engaged in a very one-on-one relationship with anybody who I'm talking to here. When I'm talking with Rachel, it's just me and Rachel. So it's a genuine one-on-one conversation. And we're probably not talking about matters that require TI. In other words, Rachel and I don't really talk about public policy at all. She doesn't necessarily agree with me on everything, and we don't want to fight about it. And she's much more worried about the fact that she doesn't agree with me than I am. I don't care. She can believe whatever the fuck she wants politically. But, you know, it's like, as long as she doesn't want to try to convince me she's right about something that she's wrong about, then we don't ever need to talk about it. What do you think the technique of Buddhism was all about? Well, Buddhism is an approach to, I guess, spiritual optimality that prioritizes, well, I mean, okay, so Buddhism basically does this. It understands that we cannot universalize any positive moral indications. And so it says, let's try not to do things then. Let's try just to be as much as we can. Now, this does make for a spiritual approach that's consistent with morality on the negative end of things. In other words, Buddhists are probably the least likely to violate rights, to do harm. However, it's very much a head in the sand spiritual worldview because it misunderstands human agency. It thinks that because human agency causes so many problems, human agency must itself be a problem. The solution is not detachment. Attachment is not the problem. Attachment, suffering, loss, joy, ecstasy, all of those ups and downs and realities, that's the human experience. Trying to spiritualize those authentic volatility of being. Trying to spiritualize away the authentic volatility of being is a bad idea, fundamentally a bad idea. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. So it does work to a certain extent. If you get a bunch of Buddhist monks together and let them all be Buddhists do their Buddhist monk thing for a long time, like Zen Buddhists or whatever, then there's no doubt that they will have a certain enlightened glow about them, and that they will do very little harm and feel very at peace with their extremely, moment to moment ordered kind of life. If they're the kind of person that likes that shit, But the thing is, if I were a Buddhist, I wouldn't save the country. Instead, I'm a Christian, and I'm going to run for president and save the country. So, to me, that's end of story. Christianity wins. Christianity's frame of reference is that, yes, suffering is bad, so quit causing it. And if you do, you fucked up. You're a sinner, and you need to repent. But good news, you'll be forgiven if you do. It doesn't say stop doing. It says understand that being a human being involves moral agency, that you are required to take action, and that you are unable. Also, being a human being means you cannot correctly predict all the impacts of your action. So as a consequence, you can't use predicted impacts as a justification for bad action. That's what Christianity tells us. Well, I mean, we can disagree about Christianity and both be right, because Christianity is a magical thinking frame. So magical thinking frames are, I can logically explain why a given magical thinking frame works better as a moral foundation, as I have here, but I can't successfully argue that my vision of Christianity is better than yours, nor can you argue that yours is better than mine, because fundamentally we're talking about the kind of frame that doesn't parse out logically. No, we can, because it's not subject to that kind of metric. So, like, for example, I can both be sad and happy at the same time, right? I can't both be inside and outside at the same time, but I can be both sad and happy at the same time, right? The Flash? So, in other words, some things are exclusive of each other and some things are not. Exclusivity is something that we need to determine before we make claims about whether or not that rule of exclusivity applies here. Are you not hearing me? I mean, I'm explaining it perfectly well. It is true that I can be both sad and happy at the same time, right? I'm so happy we won, but the same time, I'm kind of sad that the playoffs are over and we're not going to play together as a team anymore. Well, I mean, the thing is, nobody can claim to be right about a magical thinking frame. What I am claiming to be right about is that Christianity provides a moral understanding that allows for actions even in the reality where we might end up making a mistake and doing something bad, because it understands that people will sin and need to be afforded the opportunity to make mistakes and be forgiven and try again, right? Now, you could say, no, it's better to take the Buddhist approach and reject doing entirely in some sense. No, you can be happy and sad about the same thing, right? Like, now we'll parse it out in language into separate things, because if we say, I'm happy that she's leaving and I'm sad that she's leaving, people will go, well, tell me more. And you'll go, well, I'm happy she's leaving because I know that she's going to have a lot of great adventures and this is what's best for her. And I'm sad that she's leaving because I'm going to miss her. Well, you're still sad and happy about the same thing, her leaving, right? You're parsing it into two separate things because somebody's asked you to, or because language is that way. Language is binary in that way, but feelings aren't, right? So in that regard, feelings are least effective. I mean, language is least effective at communicating about things that are least binary. Hi, Rachel, my darling. So in other words, the Flash, you could be right that if you want to argue that Buddhism is the better approach, or you could be wrong. That's kind of a toss-up. But you can't be right that Buddhism affords one a framework that implies continue forward, make mistakes, repent those mistakes, and continue trying to do good despite the uncertainty. Whereas Buddhism less affords that same framework. So that's an objectively true thing. I'm objectively comparing two schools of thought. There's no disputing that. But whether one's better than the other, that's not an objective thing, because they're both magical thinking frames. Well, I mean, look, hey, let's talk about probability now. Probability is broadly, horribly misapplied in the same way that Genexial is misapplying it here, okay? Whether or not it rains tomorrow, there is either 100% chance that it rains tomorrow or 0% chance that it rains tomorrow, okay? There is no 50% chance that it rains tomorrow. There's one way that explains everything. Sim theory has 100% chance of being that way or 0% chance of being that way. So saying things are more or less likely to be so when there's only one instance of it is misapplying probability. Let's talk about working your way to repentance and salvation in the same breath. You deny the one thing that reveals to you the way to do that, the Bible. I don't deny the Bible. When did I deny the Bible? I mean, where do you think I got the idea of Jesus dying on the cross and being reborn and paying for our sins and stuff? Okay, so as the Bible explicitly says, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, right? But this is a cigarette is a true statement, but this cigarette is not Jesus. I go north to the ATM. That's the way I go. None of that way is Jesus. I've been known as the life of the party on a couple of occasions, but I am not Jesus. So I don't reject the Bible. When the Bible says things that make sense, that I can use as words that mean things, I don't reject the Bible. I also remember and recognize and acknowledge the fact, the flash, that the Bible was not written by God or Jesus, but by regular people like you who are very fallible. And the Bible largely wasn't written by people like me who are much less fallible. So, I mean, why should Paul be more trusted and expert on what Jesus means than me? Do you think he's smarter than me? Do you think he's more careful about argumentation than me? Do you think God wants weak-ass scrubs presenting his will to people? I don't. All scripture is given by inspiration of God. So, in other words, God doesn't get credit for it. Like, in other words, it's not a Harry Potter movie that's based on a Harry Potter book. It's Con Air that's inspired by a headline in a newspaper. Is that what you're saying? That's a pretty fucking weak link to God. Jesus Christ. Even the Bible itself tells us that. All scripture is just given by inspiration by God. And is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every work. So it's good to have as a half-assed heuristic, given that it's just inspired by God. But don't forget, it's just inspired by God. So, these scrubs that we got to write this are probably going to do a shitty job of it. That's my interpretation of that. Don't make sure you use your own brain to fix where these people fucked it up, because remember, it's just inspired by them. That's the meaning of that. You're the one who hates the Bible, not me. I interpret it correctly. You refuse to. So, your shitting on Jesus is your problem, not mine. That's how the ENTP does business, you see? That's exactly how ENTPs do business. No, you're not banned. You're fresh. You're refreshed. You are as fresh as a spring flower, Boba Fett. Right. From what I understand from John, Luke was an ESFP. Chances of him getting it right are zero. It's like, it's not like Jesus chose his disciples and was typist and said, I'm only choosing INTPs and ENTPs. He let anybody. He was equal opportunity Christian, right? Jew, actually, but regardless, he was an equal opportunity Jew. He said, everybody can come believe what I'm saying. It doesn't matter what kind of person you are. And then, Jesus wanted the INTPs to write the Bible, but they have S.E. Poehler, who actually wrote it. Like ENTJs and ENFJs, probably they got SE third. It's really gratifying for them to get shit done. Can we trust them with their SI Poehler? No. They're not going to get it right. ENFJs and ENTJs. ENTP probably wrote like part of one book and then somebody else had to finish for him, you know. Your response to scriptures I've shown you reflect that you have a heart hardened against God and the word of God, which he has inspired himself through the Holy Spirit. The natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, nor can he know them because they are spiritually discerned. You're the one being presumptuous about what you know about God's will, not me. Now, keep in mind, the Flash, you've made the statement that my heart is hardened to God. Okay? You have made that claim that my heart is hardened to God, even though I attribute to God credit for my continual sobriety. I don't drink any alcohol and haven't for 7 years. Why? Not because of me, but because of God. If in fact my heart is hardened to God, then why do I, on the regular, pray to God and Jesus before bed? And what kind of prayers do I offer? Prayers of gratitude and prayers of seeking forgiveness. Not asking for things like, give me a new car, right? I have a very healthy relationship with God. If your obsession with biblical verse has caused you to conclude that my heart is hardened against God, then you need to look in the mirror. You need to take a hard, long look in the mirror. I got some good news for you, Flash. I forgive you your impertinence. After all, what would Jesus do? Flash is like, wow, I just got the shit slammed out of me. I had no idea I was so wicked. Yeah, you're pretty wicked. A caller at this hour? Hello? It's just, have I ever experienced telepathy? No. No one naturally seeks God? Well, I didn't naturally seek God. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went there with an unusual humility for myself, which is to say, Eric, you do not know best. Your knowing best has caused you to be a drunk. And so you need to stop trying to figure out what's correct and just listen to these people and do what they say. And one of the things they told me to do was pray. I said, but I don't believe in God. I said, pray anyway. And I did. And I developed a robust magical thinking frame. Vastly more robust than yours, obviously. There's no disputing that my Christianity is vastly more robust than yours. After all, I believe in a good and just God who rewards me for my ideation about him. After all, God gave me the power to successfully critique what's wrong with writing. Why would he not want me to apply it to his own scripture? Think. I mean, all you have to do is use your brain for a fucking second to realize I'm correct. Eric, you know how people glorify their crushes to a point that they're thinking about a different version of that person? Do you think people are praying to the same God? No, absolutely not. And that's why my position is I am totally opposed to evangelism. Absolutely opposed to it. It's attraction, not promotion. I don't care if the Flash agrees with me about Christianity or not. I'm not trying to impose my Christianity on him. He's trying to impose his Christianity on me. I do believe in Jesus. And the reason, where did I get the concept of Jesus from if not the Bible? And I believe that the Bible is as correct as people could make it at the time. I believe in Jungian cognitive functions. That doesn't mean I think Jung got everything right. For Christ's sakes. The Flash, will you stop telling me what I believe? You believe in maiming children, The Flash. You believe in it. Yes, you do. You believe in maiming children. Why, The Flash? Why do you believe in maiming children so much? You can show me as much scripture as you want, The Flash. I have a personal relationship with God and Jesus that has successfully kept me from drinking for the past 7 years. I'm not trying to tell you to adopt my understanding of Christianity. You're trying to tell me I'm not a Christian. So God really doesn't like that. And regardless of God, that makes you a complete fucking asswipe. And that's it, you know? You're trying to deny my personal relationship with Jesus and God. As you're trying to say it is illegitimate because you don't like my interpretation of the Bible. Okay, so I'm a person who prays to Jesus Christ and God. What would you call that if not a Christian? A Muslim? No, I don't think the big book is greater than the Bible. I think that people have a moral responsibility to be moral agents. You can try to delegate that responsibility to something else. You can try to pretend that the Bible replaces your own responsibility, your own moral responsibility. God doesn't want you to do that. But you can try to pretend that if you want. Or you can man up, be a man, and understand that you are a moral agent. That God's will is not easy to understand. You know? That God's will is easiest to understand when it's telling us what is prohibited, and most challenging to understand when it's telling us what is required. He's talking about you, The Flash. The Flash quotes, "These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me and stuck in words in the Bible and critiquing and negating others' belief in me. Instead of embracing the love of God as universal, they try to exclude individuals from participating in this." He's talking about you, The Flash. You're the problem that's being talked about there, not me, right? You're the one who's negating my legitimate relationship with God. I'm not negating yours. It doesn't matter how many quotes you give me, they'll all be turned against you because God hates your judgmentalism. You are being wicked. You are a sinner like me. The difference is I'm a sinner who recognizes his sins and repents them. You're a sinner who doubles down. And there's one thing that I fucking hate. So when people are wrong and they double down, it's like I've already informed you of why you're wrong. I don't need to spend 50 fucking more minutes yelling at you, explaining to you again and again why you're wrong. You haven't answered what I've said. Respond with your own words if you want to be taken seriously. Simply quoting more Bible verse shows how detached you are from God and how attached you are to cold, dead words. If you want to say the Bible is living word, well, what does it mean when we say something's a living document? It means it's continually being updated. So it makes perfect sense for me to update it then, doesn't it? Fucktard. God. It's like, get your retardation out of my religion, please. Just like I don't like to have porn mixed with other media, I also don't like to have retardation mixed with my intelligence. What was the turning point from a non-religious to a believer? It was a bottom. It was humility. It was a recognition I can't handle alcohol myself. I can't quit myself. I can't control it. I can't stop. I can't do it. My will and my approach and my way doesn't work here. So the nice thing is reality tells you these things. So if my way and my approach to Christianity didn't work, I'd be drunk right now instead of making this video. So we know that my approach towards a relationship with God works. If the Bible is the living word of Jesus, living word means it's updated. Just like the Constitution is a living document, that means we change it. It's subject to change, subject to reinterpretation. It's not set in stone. That's what it means. If you don't care what words mean, then you can't claim to care about the Bible. Okay? Yeah, the flash is really dense. That way you shoot it out to me and maybe I'll make it. Who knows? You never know. If you shoot me a link to somebody that seems like I want to type, please, maybe I'll do it. The problem with, in general, embracing the Bible as the definitive source on Christianity is that it's so enormously open to interpretation that you could argue what God says here or there in the Bible indefinitely and never reach any definitive conclusion about it. So, to the extent that we want to focus on stuff from the Bible, focus on the key points that are relevant and try to excise the stuff that is actually contrary to core Christian values. And there is stuff in there that is, because people like the Flash, somebody like the Flash had some part in writing that, and doesn't matter what bullshit he held in his thoughts, it was going down on paper. I mean, here's the thing. Words are words. All words are living in the sense that they evolve over time. Unlike physical things, words evolve. And so it's the case that, for example, it used to be very plausible to say, oh, I'm looking forward to going downtown and purchasing a very gay outfit for the festival. And for it to just mean you were going to get some colorful clothes. It doesn't mean that anymore. Okay, well, horse mom alert, look. It's been called that many times. Whether or not the fact that it needs to be interpreted is indisputable. Yes, your test is working, Boba Fett. But the point is, don't think words are something that they're not. Okay, words are ways to express specific meanings, but how specific a meaning is depends on the scope of what's being covered. So, if I want to say this is a cigarette box, it's a very specific meaning. It's very easy to express in words. If I want to tell you what comprises a proper relationship with God, it's you're talking about statements that are a lot more involved than that, right? And that, God definitionally is ineffable, which is to say we are limited definitionally in our scope and capacity to understand God's will and interests. And so as a consequence, being a moral agent means trying to understand God's will. If the Bible were all we need to know about it, then there'd be no moral agency. What's going on Rachel's phone? Spam risk. Spam risk is calling. I am so glad my name's not spam risk. If my name were spam risk, nobody would ever answer my calls. You just broke up with your girlfriend? I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, I'm sorrier to hear it if she just broke up with you. And I'm sorry to hear it if you just broke up with her. She's sensitive? I mean, responding with a lot of very strong emotions to a breakup is not being sensitive. It's being human. You know, breakups are very traumatic events for everybody. Rise above it, huh? In what way do you think Christianity is holding me down? In other words, what are the vectors of limitation that Christianity is imposing on me that DMT would relieve? So, Horse Mumbler, there is, in fact, a protocol for amending the Constitution. So, and it is indeed meant to be changed if need be, and we have amended it on occasions in the past. It is something that is necessarily going to be interpreted. Now, I am with you in regards to a narrow rather than a broad interpretation. So, I think the first and biggest and most damaging mistake that the courts ever made was to interpret the spending clause of the enumerated powers of Congress to be expansive such that Congress could basically tax and spend on anything. And it didn't matter, which basically made the whole idea of enumerated powers irrelevant, right? Because if these are your powers, the spending is supposed to be in keeping with the other powers. So they can spend on postal stuff, on copyright, on fighting pirates, on there's a list of things they can do, right? But when the courts interpreted the spending clause to afford them more expansive jurisdiction than would otherwise have, in other words, well, you can buy stuff that's not needed for you to fulfill your duties. That was a huge mistake. And that's why we have this massively overblown federal government. You've got some processing to do. Right before you broke up, the last thing you should do before you break up, Ananova 5, is play the song, Say Something, I'm Giving Up on You. And then after the song's over, if she doesn't say anything, you go, all right, we're done.
So what if she says something that's not positive?
Wrong. I should have said say the right something when I sang that song, okay? That's the wrong something. You're gone, lady. You're 20 years old, Ananova 5? Well, you'll get over it soon enough, I'm sure. When you're 20 and you break up, it feels like death, but it's actually more like a stub toe. That song depresses you, or are you alone in that? Anybody who's in a failing relationship, that song will consume their soul for the duration of its playing. But the very saddest song of all, of course, what if she says, sing that song? Well, then she's going to inform you afterwards what you should do by whether she says something or not. But the absolute saddest song of all is through the summer and the fall, we had each other, that was all. in somebody. For instance, believing Jesus to be the Son of God is the most limiting imagination I've ever witnessed. Okay, so, but how does that limit me? First of all, remember, just because I pray to Jesus and God doesn't necessarily mean I agree with statements of affirmation that you might assume I agree with. So I'm willing to say I believe in God, but I'm not willing to affirm the statement that God exists, because that's a different sort of thing, right? It's like believing, if I have to say I believe in God, is to say I act as though God is a real thing, at least some of the time. To say that God exists is to say that I affirm the statement God exists. So it's important, Radchick, to if you really believe that my religious framework is limiting me in some capacity, then I'd like to understand in what way it limits me. No, you and I are broadly in agreement about this, Horseman Board. We don't actually disagree. I was whether or not the Constitution is a living document, I was using that expression to point out the fact that when we say words or documents are living, we mean that they're subject to update and or reinterpretation. So it's like, yeah, come in.
When are your extractions? Tomorrow?
Saturday.
Today's Thursday.
Yes, I'm going to. I have a work at 11, and then after
11 on Saturday.
No, 11 today.
Today.
Yeah, but then after that,
I thought we had to go down today, and then they're going to look at it.
No, I'm not going to the dentist today. I have work today.
Work today, right? Okay.
Right at 11.
Saturday.
Yeah.
At 11.
No, Saturday is not at 11. I have work today at 11.
Saturday.
Saturday.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is, my position on faith as well is that faith is belief in the absence of evidence or in the face of contrary evidence. So to say that you have faith in something that's objectively true is to contradict yourself. I mean, the thing is, Rachel asked a good question. What did she ask? I didn't see Rachel's question. Did you ask a question?
I literally only asked if coffee was made.
That is a good question. The thing is, Alex Rodriguez catches on to something here that's important, which is, by definition, commitment to any belief is limiting. So I think maybe a better way of putting that is totalizing any frame of reference is a way to render beliefs within that frame of reference limiting. Since I don't totalize any frame of reference, but try to afford each frame of reference its due jurisdiction, then hopefully I'm not subject to being limited by any of those frames. Okay, fine. I agree, Horse Mumbler, with you about the Constitution. But the point is, I wasn't trying to make a point about the Constitution. I was trying to make a point about the way we use the word living when referring to documents. Do you think the Creator is easily comprehensible? No. Any faith belief is coping mechanism? I mean, that's ridiculous. When you walk down the street, you operate on the assumption that the sidewalk's not going to suddenly disappear in front of you, okay? So we could say that you believe in the constancy of the physical world because you act as though it were true. So if you wanted to find terms to mean things and actually communicate, then what you're saying makes no sense at all. It's absolutely necessary that people have faith, trust, belief to simply make their way through the world. It's not a coping mechanism. It's a non-binary. So in other words, because not everything in the world is binary, we have to operate with incomplete information. So we have both binary determination approaches, like the ones I'm using now, and we have holistic determination approaches, such as faith and assumption and things like that. Like Radcheck, you seem to believe yourself to be in possession of some sort of wisdom or knowledge that is beyond that which I possess, right? Regarding the spiritual world and stuff. But everything you've said so far would suggest the opposite, you know? It didn't help me cope with my alcohol problem. My relationship with God allowed me to quit drinking alcohol. That's not coping with something, right? That's solving it. So it's like, what people typically mean when they say God is a coping mechanism is they mean that people have a fundamental existential fear, that they have a fear of death, and that God's promise that you will live on after death is how they cope with that fear, so they don't have to carry it around with them and worry about it. They just pretend like the thing that's scary, death, isn't really there. It's not really death. You're going to live on afterwards, right? Except I don't have any position about the afterlife. And I don't know anything about it. I have no way of knowing anything about the afterlife. So I don't use it as a coping mechanism for fear of death. You could say it's a coping, it helps me to cope with my own humanity. You know, it's like participating in a frame in which I can make honest mistakes as part of my growing process and not be damned because of those mistakes is definitely a frame of reference. I mean, I think you've mistaken a frame of reference for a coping mechanism, I guess. A coping mechanism might be this, right? Cigarettes help me to cope with my fourth slot SI, basically. I like to have a lot of stimulation physically because it helps to provide a little sensory grounding to a person who's otherwise very much metaphysical in his approach towards things. But what you see here today is one of the fun things of life. Here I am, a self-professed Christian, talking about how well Christianity has suited me and such, and I get attacked from two directions. One, a Christian who insists I'm not really a Christian, and two, a EXFP who insists that Christianity is a limiting belief. So it's like, of course, they're both wrong, you know? So it's like, I would suggest that Radcheck, if you want to meaningfully engage with this subject, try to sort of collect frames of reference and understand them as frames of reference. I sound like an ENFP right now, no evidence backed up. Okay, so there are two kinds of arguments that people have, one of which is what you might call making concrete claims that require empirics, and the other is a reason-based case. So, for example, the theory of relativity was a reason-based case. It's derived from a few observations, but it's not empirically supported in and of itself by anything, right? The empirics had to come later. So just because a a theory is reason-based rather than empirics-based doesn't make it less objective, because reason and empirics are two different sides of objectivity. Now, of course, what I'm saying here withstands reason-based scrutiny. And if you don't acknowledge that reason-based scrutiny is a form of objectivity, or don't distinguish or are unable to distinguish between reason and empirics, then there's a very, very good chance you're TI polar, which is ENFP or ESFP. Well, we are talking about different evaluatory metrics. That's what cognitive functions is very much about, you know? It's like Radchak is critiquing my position on Christianity and insisting it be a limiting belief, but she's not asked me any questions, for example. She's not tested to see how my Christianity plays out argumentationally. The only way she could establish it was a limiting belief is to see if argumentationally it precludes me from acknowledging things that are true, or exploring areas where things might be true, or something like that, right? Does type have anything to do with religion? Well, I mean, I think that your ENTP Christians are probably going to be much more involved in the ideation of their own Christianity, and say an ISTJ Christian or ISFP Christian is going to be very much everything I need to know is in the Bible, you know? But either type might be Christian. I think ESTJs are probably least likely to be spiritual or religious, followed by ESFJs, because I think NI is the sense of magic in the world, basically, that things have a holistic identity that exceeds the sum of their parts. Synergy and NI go very much together. And belief in God or experience of faith-based behaviors. So I've always in the past insisted I engage in faith-based behaviors and I try to avoid faith arguments, right? So a lot of people have strong arguments about religion, God, Christianity, or whatever. In my mind, they're all making a category error. You know, a magical thinking frame is not the sort of thinking frame that you can argue substantially. Definitionally, if you are arguing it well, then it's not faith-based anymore. So the thing is, it's like my perspective on faith, religion, and the self, moral agency, and such is vastly better, more developed, more nuanced, more sophisticated, and more correct than either that of Radchak or the Flash. But it's still fundamentally a faith-based behavior. The only reason my system of understanding is so much more developed is because I get that. I get the distinction between behaviors and arguments, and they don't. I like Chris Chapin too.
Question.
Oh. Can a person pause any or all cognition for a period of time? Why or why not? Without being knocked unconscious, I would guess no. What I've noticed is this for myself, and these observations probably extrapolate pretty well out to other types in general.
Do you want me to go through the store?
No, you're fine. I've noticed that when I'm in the bath or something and I'm genuinely paying attention to introverted sensing experience, which is to say I'm probably going, right, oh yeah. When I'm in that state of being, I'm not doing extroverted intuition. So when I'm attending to how good my body feels being cozy in bed or in the bath or whatever, then I am not ideating, which suggests that if you engage your fourth slot in real time, that you're not concurrently engaging your first slot in real time, at least for me. Now, keeping in mind that SI is first a real-time experiential kind of knowing, and second, a keep track of stuff across time kind of knowing. So if you have different functions in the 1-4, it might not play out this way, but for me, it does. it's also the case that I can isolate extroverted intuition from introverted thinking. There are plenty of times when I'm just making jokes and I'm not using TI consistency as a way of adjudicating things, right? On the other hand, I think that interfacers don't really ever seem to use their interface function separate from their knowledge function. So it's like, it's hard to understand how FE could occur without some NI or SI, without some kind of knowledge reference point. But it's easy to understand how extroverted intuition can occur without a judgment being made. I can come up with a bunch of random words. That's not using either TI or FI, right? Or any other deliberation function. But we can't really conceive of somebody paying attention by extroverted feeling or extroverted thinking that doesn't require them to also incorporate knowledge. Have I heard of Clay Arnell? No. Yogananda's Church of All Religion. Is that the place I was at yesterday? Boba Fett, that Church of All Religions that I was standing in front of in that video. Did you see it? Somehow objective thinking is acknowledging that we know nothing. Any belief system is subjective perception. Okay, well, Radchek, if you think everything is subjective, that's like saying the same thing as every direction is up. The reason you can use the word subjective to mean something is because it's distinct from things that are not subjective. So, like I've already pointed out, we know what you're talking about here is complete nonsense, because we already pointed out that when I show you this and it's objective data that everybody can access equally, that there will be universal consensus as to the truth value of a statement I make about it. If I tell you this is a turtle I'm holding up, there will be universal consensus that the truth value of the statement is false. Okay? Now, whether you call that, I'm doing objective thinking there, right? But I'm also not, implicit to that is not an acknowledgement that we know nothing or that any belief or faith is subjective. Instead, it's saying we can make distinctions. Our statements about this thing that's a fact and evidence are much easier to parse than statements about things that are not facts and evidence. So, no, it is not true that we know nothing and that all statements are equally subjective. That's simply not the case. Additionally, if what you do say is true and you apply it to yourself, then we should not pay any attention to you. Now, I'm not making that kind of stupid claim. So my words are still valuable. My words still have meaning. But if you actually believe that, then you believe your own words have no meaning and nobody should listen to you. All you know is that you know nothing. Well, then nobody should listen to you and you have nothing worth listening to. All Christianity is biased. Christianity can't have a bias. It's not a human being. Right? Human beings have biases. We as a humanity know nothing about the universe. That's factually untrue. For example, we know the earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. Therefore, I prove that you have a cognitive bias as think you're more developed. No, you just proved that you don't know how to think. And that you are an ESFP. Not to bring type into it, but that's what you proved. You're an ESFP.
Do you think ESFPs like go into your channel, or that there is an abundance of ESFPs?
I think there's an abundance of ESFPs. They're interested. I mean, ESFPs are the type that's most likely to self-identify as wise and positioned to instruct others on how to live while concurrently being incredibly unwise and unwell positioned to do so. We cannot, as every belief as loophole and contradictory. Every belief has a loophole and is contradictory. I mean, if you exclude conditionality entirely, I guess you could say that there's an answer to every statement, but it is not the case that every statement has loopholes and is contradictory. If I say, if it gets to 0 degrees tonight, then my plants will die. That is true, right? There's no loophole or contradiction in there because it's conditional, right? It's not a trump card. It's a recognition that there's no way I'm going to make any progress. She'll never listen to me or learn anything. That's what I say when I say you're an ESFP. It's not trying to dismiss her arguments. Her arguments I still deal with on their merits. It's me working up to giving up on her. Every answer, every statement has at least one answer to it. So, I mean, no matter what statement you make, I can critique it or negate it in some way or another. It's not unnegatable. Whether the negation is legitimate or not is another question. All right, I got to go because I got work at 11. Bye, everybody. Love you. See you. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.